in that directory it said that I'm a chief forester of Nanabush Food Forests, or they called it Nanabish, but Nanabush Food Forests. I'm actually a computer programmer. That's how I make my living. Many of you know that. But this is my hobby, my passion, something that I get a chance to work with Trish, if you recall Trish. She works with Just Food. It's an organization for food justice in Ottawa. I'm a partner. Nanabush Food Forest is a partner of that organization. So we get a chance to see each other quite frequently, which is great. So what we're going to really cover today here is we're going to take a walk through the woods together. We're going to wander about, and how we're going to go is by asking questions along the way. I'm going to say, what is a food forest? I'm going to ask, why in the heck would you want one? I'm going to really meander, like I'll go off topic horribly a couple of times, and I'm just going to talk about the pictures that I'm sharing with you instead of anything that might make sense. So, shout out if I'm rambling, and I'm only on 2 hours sleep, so this could be an interesting presentation. All right, so first I'm going to, on each picture I'll tell you what it is. What are you looking at? This is a King Stropharia mushroom. It's a delicious mushroom. It's also called a wine cap mushroom, also known as a garden giant. So these mushrooms that you're seeing here are about this big. If we were to leave them, they end up getting about this tall and this wide around. They're not good to eat at that point. The texture isn't very good, but you could use them as a parasol. If you were in land rescue weekend and you couldn't get your fire started, you could probably do that. The other thing I really like about this mushroom is that bees and other creatures go nuts for it. And they've done a bunch of studies and research now that shows that this is helping bees, helping build their immune system. So there's a beefriendly.org organization that's actually studying the effects of mushrooms and the use of extracts from mushrooms for bees and battling colony collapse disorder. So we're growing a lot of these mushrooms around the base of trees in the food forest, and they're usually covered with bees. And they're delicious as well. So the thing that bees like to eat are actually it's actually the mycelium, the body of the mushroom. But we're going to go off and talk more about mushrooms in a little bit. I just want to keep moving along. What is a food forest? It's a forest. It's a gardening technique, really, that mimics a natural ecosystem. So it doesn't look like straight rows. If you're a hyper anal person, you will hate going into one of these, or if you're afraid of nature. But if you enjoy walking through the woods, if you enjoy spending time in a kind of a very natural environment, then you'll enjoy walking through a food forest. I also really like the fact that it feels like I'm foraging when I go picking food. There's something very pleasing about that activity. And I just want to quickly talk about the anatomy of a food forest then, that you can grow a lot of food in a really small space. Because we're using vertical height, we're using the vertical space, and typically in a food forest you'll have the really tall canopy trees, the nut trees, the larger fruit trees. You'll have the smaller dwarfing or semi-dwarf fruit trees and different things of this height. So you can really see a lot of fruit bushes kind of fit into that layer number 3, but also tall perennial vegetables and that kind of thing. You also have the rhizome layer, the layer under the soil. So that's root crops, but it's very much a lot of mushrooms as well that have their body in the soil. We grow mushrooms in the ground and in wood and in straw. So they're, depending on the type of mushroom, it'll depend on where you find them growing in the forest. And then there's the ground cover layer. So we know of the lingonberries of Scandinavia. We know of strawberries and crawling wild strawberries. There's a lot of different kind of ground cover that we're using to, one, have no bare soil, because bare soil evaporates water quickly, and bare soil, the organisms and microorganisms in the soil do not like that environment very much. They like to have heavy mulch. If you walk into a natural forest, no one's raking the leaves up. The leaves are dropping. Things in the soil are decaying, helping breaking down the leaves, making the soil richer with each time that leaves drop. So, and I'll just mention that in North America, it's actually that activity in the forest floor, that activity of a lot of mushrooms, primary kind of consumers, decomposers, have allowed us to have this rich soil in Canada. We don't, up until 400 years ago, we hadn't had earthworms in North America because the last ice age wiped them out. So there were no worms up until 400 years ago in Canada. We had mushrooms helping us make our soil. So, yeah, for sure.
Because it really strikes me how few birds there are around.
Birds? Here.
In Canada?
Oh, no, there's many, many, many birds.
But in the forest.
Okay, yeah.
Birds don't love forests.
No, yeah,
they love meadows.
Yeah, meadows. They're on the fringe of forests, yeah. And also, so we have, I grew up in Saskatchewan, which many of you might know, and we are on the migration route. So we have a lot of birds coming through. There are people that come from around the world to come and see birds in Saskatchewan. But yeah, maybe in the forest. I guess it really depends on how safe they feel and how much food they have access to.
It's dry too, Shelley, without
Here? I don't know. I was sitting out in the common room and I was being bombarded by the sound of bird songs, so I haven't actually experienced that there wasn't many. But yeah, I'm not sure. All right, so I just want to move ahead because I don't want to run long for you guys. But so this is the very first time I've ever seen this really beautiful pollinator. It's called a hummingbird moth. And you can't quite tell from this photo, but it has a really long proboscis that it likes to dip into flowers. And it moves like a hummingbird. It's a moth, but it moves around really quickly like a hummingbird. It's the first time I've ever seen them, and that our food forest that's 4 years old is littered with them this year. So it's very exciting to watch them move around. So this is us, or this is the why would you want a food forest? I'm going to say there's many reasons to establish food forests. You can see this honeybee coming into a flower of an onion, and you can see the pollen loaded up on its leg. It's hard to describe in still photos just how much life is living in these small spaces that we're creating. But I will say one of the main reasons why we'd want a food forest is that it's a great way to produce food. You have immediate food and you have long-term food. When you just establish a forest the very first year, maybe you're putting trees in that you started from seed or smaller trees. There's a lot of space in between them. There's no shade from them. So you put a lot of these annuals in between to make use of the space and get immediate food, reap immediate harvest that year. I don't really want to spend every spring planting thousands of seedlings like I have done over the past little while. But because, you want to have some food production off of the piece of land you're growing on right away, this is the typical technique that we do. Another reason why you would want food forests, and I think I've mentioned this before, pollinators and other beneficial critters, I'll call them. These are a set, this is a nest of ground nesting bees. They're native to the area that we have. We found about 7 different nests of 5 different types of bees that have made their nest in the one food forest that we use as our demonstration forest, along with the honeybees from the neighboring hives that are nearby us. So just in bees alone, we have very, very many kinds. I'd probably like to spend the next year just researching the hundreds of different kinds of bees there are so I could identify each one, but I can't see that happening because that would take a lot of time. So if anyone is a bee expert, please contact me. I would love to.
Is this your photography?
This is John's photography. Yeah, I'm very lucky that I now have a. Oh, I was going to introduce him later, but anyway, yes, the documenter of the forest is sitting with us right now. So the other reason to have a food forest is I will just use the word diversity. It's not just the diversity of the plants, but I'm going to talk about that right now because the more plants, the more different plants you have growing in a small space, the more they seem to benefit each other. So you'll see a picture later of a comfrey plant that's planted next to a tree. And a comfrey is planted as a dynamic accumulator. Its roots can go down about 10 feet and it'll suck nutrients up to the area where the other plants have their roots. So they are working together. Plants do talk to each other and they often talk to each other through the mycelial network. So it's kind of, if you only had a monocrop, you're doing nature a disservice essentially because nature wants to have diversity and does much better when you have a variety of things. Even from the perspective of the pollinators, you take a look at California almonds and that they ship bees across the country for a 2-week period of time when those things are flowering. And then they can't survive for the rest of the time in the year because there's no food for them. So they can't live there. And the solution would be to plant some other things near those trees so they wouldn't have to ship truckloads of bees across thousands of kilometers. So I would hope that they're starting to do some of that, but I think that probably the thing to do is to document just how beneficial a diverse set of species in one place is, and then kind of lead by example.
And I imagine that some species or plants talk better to each other than others.
Yes, and I'm actually going to show you a 1-minute video or a couple-minute video of some species that talk to each other. And recent research from UBC, a professor at UBC that proved that different species were talking to each other. And it's pretty cool, actually. And how they're doing that is amazing. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, and maybe this is common knowledge at this point, but the honey industry is something like 6% of the bee industry.
Yeah.
93% of the bee industry is driving bees around the countryside in giant trucks.
Yeah.
To pollinate fields that are too large for any native bee to ever fly over.
Yeah.
So our entire agricultural system is maintained by semi-trucks full of domestic bees being trucked.
Yeah, and then there's the question, I don't know why my hive won't overwinter or why it died out. I don't know if I had to, yeah, anyway. Let's continue on. Soil. Why would I want to plant a food forest? Well, it turns out, in my opinion, soil is a financial institution. And in this way, we're not tilling, we're actually building soil. And I'm going to talk quite a lot about this particular topic, this particular reason why to plant food forests. But first, I'm going to hit you with some data. So essentially, this is a map of the world. I mean, one of the weird shaped ones. But the red parts are very degraded soil. The green parts are stable soil. The yellow parts are degraded, but not extremely degraded. So that looks like a map that, and then this white part, or that pale part are areas, deserts that so far you can't support vegetation there. So if you see the green parts are the places that you could actually have a stable soil and have agricultural success, you can see that maybe we would want to start regenerating or rebuilding the soil on the planet. So the stats there, during the last 40 years, 1/3 of the world's cropland has been abandoned because it's been used and ruined. And then the other thing that I found interesting is that when you think it takes 500 years to replace an inch of topsoil, unless you're actively trying to do it. So we're doing it in a very aggressive way with some techniques called mound agriculture or hugelkultur. But it's just something to keep in mind. I'd like to show a little picture here too. And I kind of, when I was thinking about this, said, what if there was actually a soil integrity index? I don't think there is one right now, but what happens if we would measure the value of our food based on the soil it was grown in? On the right there, you have a picture of healthy soil. On the left, the depleted soil. You can see that on the left-hand side, that's compressed clay soil, no real air pockets, no real movement. On the other side, the measure there, a healthy soil will have about 4 billion organisms per teaspoon in it. So there's a lot of life, there's a lot of magic that happens in the soil of something that's healthy. And you can tell when you try to grow a fruit tree in the soil on the left, it doesn't do well. So our flagship food forest is, we started with soil that was worse than that. It's essentially, we're converting a swamp into hopefully a food forest. What's interesting to me is I started another food forest in a really prime spot, and it's probably growing 2 times faster than the swamp stuff. But we are, I am seeing huge progress in the one where we're trying to reclaim swamp. But let's talk about how we're doing that. So lots of you already have built your mounds and are doing it already. Thank you for doing that in your backyards or wherever you can find them. All this really is, think about it, is a kind of a lazy compost pile covered by soil and then planted into it. So logs or windfall that we have, we gather up, sometimes leaves, sometimes just anything that will break down gets piled up either into a trench or directly on top. A trench is fine if you're not trying to build up from a swamp. Otherwise, you'd be right on top of the surface. And then for the first year, what happens is it actually takes a bit of nitrogen to start that process breaking down. But what I find is really noticeable is that this action gives us a whole lot of things. It gives us food that feeds the stuff that's growing on top. So as that breaks down, nutrients are released. It gives us water because those logs act as a sponge. So after winter and the snow melts, they hold water like nobody's business. So we had a drought in Ottawa that lasted 3 months of no rain. I did not water the mounds that we had, and we had larger tomatoes on those than the areas we were bringing water to. So they were really effective at using water very efficiently. But the other thing you get from these is you get the generation of heat. So as that stuff breaks down and degrades, it creates heat. So you can create little microclimates. So the mounds we built in Saskatchewan at my family's farm, they were able to grow cucumbers for an extra month and a half over what the neighbors had, because they had a little sheltered area between mounds where they had cucumbers into, like, no one believed that this was possible. My dad still talks about it, actually. So anyway, where we go now, in the soil, how else can we build soil? So many of you might already buy products that have mycorrhizal, or however you would pronounce that. I've heard different ways pronounced. Fungi in the soil or in starter foods and things like that. What that really means is that it's a little either spores or of mushrooms that don't necessarily fruit, but that are really good at being buddies with trees and plants. And I think it's about 80% of trees and plants on the planet do end up forming relationships with this fungi. There's very few plants that can't gain benefit. I think cabbages and cruciferous vegetables are those. But otherwise, mainly, most plants benefit a great deal. So you'll notice on the one side, you've got a tree that was planted at the same time as this other tree. It's quite stunted. You can see the root system is not as full as this other one. So every time you see more hair-like roots on a tree, it means it has more access to water and nutrients. So it'll grow faster, it'll be healthier, it'll do better. And if you can see here on that one picture to the right, those are little tree seedlings. This is just really a diagram of what's happening underneath. The roots of those trees are just near the top of that soil surface. The rest of this is mushroom mycelium, reaching down, getting more nutrients, and then passing them along to the tree root. Yeah. So, okay, so that's as much as I'm going to talk about soil right now as a reason why would you plant food forests. I'm not even going to start talking about seeds because you can just go talk to Sean McGuire probably, except to say that seeds are a big part of what having a food forest or having a sustainable model is all about, because we broadcast seed a lot of stuff, we save seeds. We're selecting things that we save for attributes beyond just shelf life or truckability, obviously. Flavor is a big important thing. Sometimes it might be because something does better in the shade. And we're trying to use up all the spaces, including the stuff in the shade. So by saving your own seeds, you get to choose what attributes that you want to keep going. We're using a lot of different propagation techniques in the food forest, and we've started a seed exchange, actually a food forest exchange in Ottawa, where it kind of got away on me a little bit because it started off as a Facebook group and I didn't know what would happen. It's got hundreds and hundreds of members now, and they get together spring and fall to exchange cuttings and seeds and stuff and knowledge, and it's pretty fun and exciting. There's a lot of interesting characters in that group. Very good people, and they actually donated a lot of stuff to community food forests that we're planting. But okay, I'm going to jump right into some of the non-tangibles, if you will, reasons why you might want a food forest. There's something very special about the act of getting your hands in the dirt. There's something very lovely about stopping and seeing the beauty of something growing up from seed, or if it's a perennial or something that is coming back every year, seeing it through the seasons. I don't know how many photos of kiwi flowers, leaves, and fruit that we have. We keep cycling through them, but each year it feels different and it feels new, and it's really, really quite lovely. And I will also say, if someone were to ask me, well, what's your point? What's the point of this? Why are you doing this? In Ottawa, I've kind of keep telling people, because I think if I say it, it might happen. I'd like to see everyone in Ottawa, and then by extension Canada, and then by extension the world, grow one thing for themselves from seed. Because I think if you do that, you watch it, you see how much love and care has to go into that thing. The food that comes from it tastes really good. I think you digest your food better when you have that, because you have a gratitude for it. You know the value of that food that you ate, but also then you go, oh, all this other food that's being provided to me is of great value, and you really do feel directly that sense of gratitude. Resilience is another reason why you'd plant food forests. So the example, and I will just direct you to Mark Shepard's book, Restoration Agriculture, but the example here is that there are, in the Midwest, essentially, if there's a bad weather event and it's a giant multi-acre cornfield, the whole thing is gone. And it will actually erode the entire field. So there's no deep roots to hold the soil. It's a massive destruction. National Guards are called in. There's a big emergency. It wasn't always that case. In a lot of the areas where that happens, there might have been chestnut trees. There might have been a whole range of the different height trees that are there to, one, hold the soil, but are also there even if you get hailed out in a year. And we have had that happen where we've had big events happen, and all the leaves get shredded off of something. That plant comes back. Those trees come back. They are resilient to this kind of thing. You might lose the apples off the tree that year, but you don't lose the tree. As opposed to if it's all annuals and that's done. That's your year of food. So I would say, from a resilience point of view, it's not a bad story. Really important to me, and I'm going to go on a real tangent on this one, is creativity. So I'm going to make the assertion that if you plant a food forest, or if you're able to help in a food forest, you will become more creative. And I'm going to tell you a little bit. I'm going to use an example and hope that you'll see where I'm getting at. By the way, that's a calendula flower. Beautiful herbal tea. Wonderful medicinal properties. The bees love them. And they just look really spectacular in the food forest. They're just such a sunny thing. All right, so we're going on this tangent about creativity, and we're going to kind of say, how do things relate? How do random things relate? So I said a forest is restorative, and a food forest, therefore, is a restorative way to grow food. And then I'm going to jump all the way over to data networks have evolved over time, because I had to present to some science camp a month ago about food forests and data networks. Or I didn't have to, but I wanted to. And so we got on that topic, and then we talked about, well, a network is a group of interconnected things. And in fact, mycelium, that stuff under the trees in a forest, is Earth's natural internet. It's actually a sentient web that we walk on when we walk through the forest. And then I'm going to make the assertion, humans learn from nature. We invent by observing the natural world. And then let's say why. So 100 years ago, what was a data network? An example of a data network was the Pony Express. And it kind of looked like this. It was a path across the continent. Every 10 miles, there was a stable where a horse and rider could rest. And so you can imagine, well, that's all right. You put the letter in on this end, and it goes, oh. What happens if a river or a bridge is flooded out? Well, that letter stops, and it can't move forward until either they can figure out how to get it across the water in a different way, or they rebuild the bridge. In comes science and electron microscopes and the ability to see what do mycelial networks look like under an electron microscope. They look like the thing on the right. What does dark matter, that 80% of the universe that we don't know what it's made of, what do they suppose it looks like? They suppose that it looks like the thing on the left. So we get a chance to observe what more complex networks look like. And then we have this picture of the internet, or a diagram of what it looks like today. So did we look at that other stuff and figure out how to build a better network, so that if now a line goes down over here, we have backup paths to get the data from one end to the other. So this would be where I would normally, if you were a group of kids, we would get up and play the human network game. And I kind of don't know if we have time, but I just want everyone just to stand up. I've been sitting on my heels for like half an hour. All right, everyone's standing up. We won't go through the full one, but I kind of just want to talk about it. Oh, that's my foot was asleep. Okay, so the central controller model of networking is this. Two of you step forward, please. All right. One more person. Okay, these are our central controllers. They're going to move you guys around, and actually we'll just break it up man, female, or short hair, long hair, I guess, because that way we can break people up a little bit. Yeah, separate people into two groups. I'm going to go male, female, or I don't know. People wearing belts, people not wearing belts.
Different sides of the room or something.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Half the room over here. You're in group one. Half the room over here. You're in group two. You guys move. You guys move. Oh. Yeah. So you see these two groups. Central controllers. Everyone notice that you're in group A or group B, right? Central controllers, you have to start moving. These are your nodes in your network. You have to start moving group A people to be standing near a group B person and a group A person. So you might have to start moving people around. I would start with one person from each group and bring them together.
All right.
Step them in. Jan and Mari, bring them into the middle. So now they're standing together and they have to point at each other. Okay. So that's against the rules. They're not allowed to point at each other, but they each have to point at someone from the other group. So Mari can point at Jan, but Jan can't point back at Mari. He'll have to point at someone else. So you have to pull someone else in. So now Tracy has to point at someone from another group. Okay. So this is going pretty slowly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the central controller model. If you had a couple people having to organize your nodes in your network, it's going to take forever. Let's go for the self-organizing model. Everybody in the room move around and get yourself standing beside someone. Move yourself into position where you can point at someone from the other group and someone from your own group. So you're going to point with two hands.
And we can, two people can point at the same person.
Yeah, I know. Boy, girl was the one. But actually, I didn't want to break it up that way. Okay. The point is, say this isn't fully accurate. How much more quickly did you get all the nodes into a network of sorts? Much quicker. Okay. That was also just to wake you up and get you standing around. All right. No. So normally that would be a little better. We would actually give one group rubber gloves and one group not rubber gloves, and then later we would go out and plant mushrooms together. But I didn't bring any of that stuff. So anyway, that'll come back. So remember what you just learned a little bit about networks and smart networks and that kind of thing. I'm going to quickly get out of here and actually just show a very short video.
Trees are talking to each other. No, really, trees send each other nutrients and other chemicals through vast underground networks, effectively talking to one another. These mycorrhizal networks are made up of fungi and tree roots working in tandem. The fungi exchange the minerals they get from the soil for the sugars that trees produce. In times of stress, trees can use these underground systems to send warning signals, alerting neighbors to build up defenses against incoming pests, diseases, or drought. This pipeline also lets resource-rich trees share carbon and other nutrients with hungry trees. In summer, paper birches send food to Douglas firs when they're overshadowed by leafier trees. Then in fall, Douglas firs return the favor by sending carbon back the other way. Resource sharing happens all over the forest, with some older trees helping seedlings that are just starting off in life. And just like humans, trees tend to help their own family members out more often. But when loggers clear cut a forest, or when climate change disrupts an ecosystem, parts of these networks go silent. If a tree falls in the forest and its communication lines are down, no other tree will hear it fall.
No. That's not great, is it?
Depressing. We're boring.
Yeah. That's right. That's okay. We're coming back out of that deep dark hole. The I guess the thing I wanted to mention there, or the thing we're going to move from there, is that you would probably want to check out more of Suzanne Simard's work. That's a short version of the research she's done. She has done a TED Talk that's about 18 minutes long. That's really, really great. Talking about how they measured that talking between trees. So essentially what happens is that, say a forest fire ends up starting on one side, 10 kilometers wide forest starts here. Within seconds, trees on the other side of the forest start curling their leaves up in preparation for it. So it's kind of cool that they're talking, and they're not just talking information to each other, they're talking nutrients and water. They're sharing all of those things. So that's a picture, her picture of the Wood Wide Web. So the larger circles are the larger trees, which she has now called the mother trees, and the smaller ones are the younger ones that are all talking, and those are the lines of communication with each other. So I just also want to mention just a kind of a fun fact. See you. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye. Thanks. They are going to the airport. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do we want to take a 2-minute pause? Yeah. Oh, okay. He's running. Okay. Humongous fungus. I love little facts about things, and I love the fact that up until the 1990s, we thought, or mankind thought the largest thing on the planet was the blue whale. Well, it's not. It turns out that they've now found many mushrooms, individual organisms that are much, much larger. There's a honey mushroom in Oregon that's 10 square kilometers. It's estimated, they don't quite know, it's somewhere between 1900 and 8600 years old. And it's considered the largest living species on the planet until they found a larger mushroom. But what can we learn from these large, old, complex, adaptable systems? Essentially, I think what we can really learn is, one, that whole internet model. If we were to cast forward 100 years from now, what will our internet or our data communications look like? As an example, I'm using that just as an example. There are so many other things that we're going to learn from just observing nature, right? But when we were talking to the kids a month ago about this, it kind of came up that, well, maybe 100 years from now, we'll learn how to talk tree, and we'll just text a tree some information or talk information in a way they know how to hear us, and then they can send the message across the continent on a mycelial network for us to another tree near our friend across wherever. Like, I don't know. The idea is that you can have kind of all these fun, creative ideas. Who knows what 100 years from now will look like? I guess it depends on some of our actions today. So I'm still going through the reasons why. I will say a kind of one other kind of point that kind of hits home for me, and when I talk to people about food forests, I think about this a lot because we tour people, and you get different people that tour through a food forest having vastly different ways of looking at the world. This is a picture of some comfrey flowers, and bees absolutely love them. It's also kind of known as knit bone. So if you ever cut yourself or had a wound, you'd take a leaf of this and put it on and you'll heal faster. But it's the one that it's used as a dynamic accumulator. It digs down deep, crazy deep, at the root of at the base of a tree and pulls nutrients up. And it also acts, it's quite a lovely plant. It's wide, it's big, it acts like living mulch. So it's quite neat. And I think of that plant when I think about why am I planting food forests. I don't have kids of my own. But that's no reason why I shouldn't be planting food forests. I know kids. But I also have toured people that go, oh, this is a young person's game. I'm like, no, it isn't. I'm not planting food so that only I can eat food. I'm not planting trees that might not hit their maturity level until after I'm gone. A Korean pine takes 10 to 12 years before it'll start producing edible pine nuts. So we're 5 years in. I'm sure I'll get to taste some pine nuts, but it also has a lifespan of several hundred years. So of course I will plant this tree, and I will plant a pear tree that will typically live 200 years, apples 120 years, ginkgos thousands of years. So there's not really a reason to not, planting trees just makes sense. Planting for the future makes sense. It doesn't have to be just for one person or one family, because we're all interconnected on the planet, as we know here, as we all feel that here at this reunion. I won't go very long onto these topics, but I've been asked to speak at a hunger symposium in October, and they wanted me to think about food forests and hunger and how the two could be related or connected, or in what ways can food forests address hunger. And so I thought about it a little bit. These are crab apples, by the way, after a rain. And I thought about hunger being, just in a very simple way, a very great need for food. And I thought about what are some of the possible root causes of hunger. Now I get a chance to talk to people from the Ottawa Food Bank, and through this get-together called Innovation X, I'm talking and kind of working with someone working on northern greenhouse projects, and a lot of other organizations and people and individuals that are doing kind of cool, neat things. And we're thinking about how we can share our knowledge. So I'm hearing a lot of information that I don't really hear about, or I don't really think about on a day-to-day basis, but that I find interesting, and I find it kind of a fun mental game to think about, is all the information I hear correct? Because I'll hear from someone at the food bank that says, okay, well, we receive a lot of canned goods, but some of the people that are getting stuff from us don't even own a can opener, or they own a hot plate, but no pot, or one single pot. So the fact is that before we try to solve a problem, I guess we have to understand what some of the causes, the root causes are, and what would be most helpful, and talk to the people most affected so we can actually really help. But we'll say, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it's like lack of money, lack of support, lack of time, lack of space, lack of access to food, lacking nutrients is a type of hunger. So you can have food, you can be putting it in your mouth, but you might not be getting anything out of it. It might be a junk food scenario where you live in a food desert and you can't get to a place where there's food that's healthy for you. You can only buy food at a corner store because that's what's near you. So we're talking about those things, and just let's take that as an example. Can we plant food forests in city parks on city land and just have them open access to everyone? Can we use corporate property to plant food forests so that we can donate the output of that to food banks and such? So we started one this year, and I feel very lucky to be able to have done that at IBM, where I work as a software developer. They said yes when I pitched the idea, which I was surprised and super excited about. But what I'm most excited about is that once that gets established, that's an example for other corporations to follow suit. And that will be the precedence that we can kind of say, hey, this is the model we're using, and it hopefully is working. So I'm going to move along from this, but I guess what I will say is that there's sometimes people say, oh, well, I just don't have any space to grow food. You could grow a food forest in an area the size of the table I'm sitting at. You don't actually need a whole lot of space to grow a whole lot of food. And we'll quickly talk about that. So the question of who. This is a baby bird waiting for people to get out of the way so it can eat some grapes. It's looking under that trellis, and it knows there's some pretty tasty grapes in there. Thank you, John, for catching that one. This is one of my favorites. So who's establishing food forests? Lots of people, but I'll introduce that. I call myself the chief forester, but also the mosquito lure. I draw all the mosquitoes away from other people. They go directly for me. John, the documenter of forests, but also the muscle. We've planted a couple thousand fruit trees this year alone, plus probably another 5,000, 6,000 perennial plants. And so he and a small group of volunteers, very small, friend of ours, Pete, have moved 30, 40 yards of soil in wheelbarrows across kilometers of territory, and wood mulch that I'm not even sure at this point how much we've moved, but it's a lot. And then I guess I want to also thank Nanabush, he's a mythical trickster in Ojibwe myth, and he teaches man what food is medicine in the forest. And he taught man about kindness and generosity and honesty. And his image is actually on a rock cliff in Bon Echo Park, that image, and also at the Petroglyphs Park. And I really, really identify with that character and that legend, and I really wanted to share it with people. So we've also had a lot of volunteers. As this kind of grows, more and more people are just offering up help. It's like you say the 5-minute pitch to someone and they get it and they want to help and they want to get started and they want to grow their own. It's an inclusive club. There's no one that's left out of being in Food Forestry Club. These are my nieces and nephews after having built some hugelkultur mounds in Saskatchewan. They're pretty pleased with themselves in this photo. Pretty happy about it. Those were the mounds that now we can grow cucumbers into the fall without suffering from frost. So where I've already mentioned that this is the swamp we're trying to reclaim. It's you can't really quite tell, but the back third of this is typically swampy water. This is the half-acre demonstration food forest that we grow at the Just Food Farm in Ottawa. It's a NCC property, so it's an urban farm in the middle of Blackburn Hamlet.
And who owns it?
National Capital Commission owns it, but we have a long-term lease on that property. And Just Food is the holder of the lease, and then the partners have an agreement with them that we can be there and renew for. I didn't actually have that agreement before we planted hundreds of trees, so it was on faith that we wouldn't have to suddenly move them all. But Trish is the chairman of that Just Food organization, so we're working together on lots of stuff. But where would you plant food forests? I don't know. It's like we're running out of agricultural land on the planet. That's what you hear. You're running out of agricultural land if by that you mean the places that you can sweep in large tractors and machinery. But there's lots and lots and lots of land on the planet that is being used in strange ways, small little patches that could be converted, I'll say fringe areas that a lot of food could be grown at. This is just as that. I'm sorry I don't have the stats for all of either North America or the globe, but I just wanted to grab this as a quick number. And I will say that you can grow food forests in areas that are just they're too small, too hilly, too rocky, too wet. They're just too hard. Those are the places that I think I would target because Those are the places no one else cares about at the moment, and you can use them easily. If someone is starting out and they go, well, what can I do? I would advise starting very small, restricting the area to a small space first, because one, you'll feel success quicker. You can kind of take it in small bites. So if the average yard size, this is North America again, is 0.15 acres, that's the perfect size for starting a little food forest in a yard. There's lots of tricks to increasing the growing space in a very small space. So if you can imagine that I have one flat surface like this table, then that surface area is known to me. I can calculate it. But if I make an uneven surface, like I make a big mound there, now I've increased the surface area, the planting area that I have. If I do 2 mounds, mathematically, I've increased the surface area again over the single mound, and I can kind of continue that pattern and actually, from a small space, create a lot of surface area to grow, because I'm starting to use the vertical heights as well. I let vines grow up trees. I build trellises to have things growing up and over. Like hops and like grapes and like kiwi, there's a lot of really great edible vines that can be using some of that space. But what's that?
In northern Canada.
What's this?
Kiwis.
Oh, Arctic kiwis are, and actually we grow not successfully to fruit, but the kiwis you may think of. But Arctic kiwis, and I brought some. There's some in my room if you want to try one. They do grow in Siberia, so they grow to a zone 2. So, and they will fruit in complete shade, 100% shade. And in fact, it's becoming a problem because a single female kiwi vine, so you do need a male and a female to bear fruit. But a mature female kiwi vine will produce 50 kilograms of kiwi fruit. So it typically needs a pretty strong support. The one I have in my backyard is growing up and over the shed now, so it's covered the shed. You can't actually see the top of the shed anymore. And right now that we're here, it's turning ripe. It's going to be ready to pick when I get back. So yeah, it's delicious fruit, and it's a lot easier to eat because you don't have to skin it. It has no fur on it. You pop it in your mouth like a grape because they're a little bit smaller. Okay, so how do you start? You plant something. You find some place to plant something. And if you don't have property of your own, you go out and guerrilla plant something on some city property somewhere. I don't know. I'm not advocating it, but I sort of am. And we have done that. But this is actually remember that picture of that swamp? So this is a later year now of that picture. So you'll see now the sour cherry tree on the left. You'll see probably a little mound. You'll see a little apple tree in the front. This is kind of shows off as a little bit weedy. We don't weed. John mows so that you can actually see to one end and the other, just in between stuff for now, because it makes it a better experience to be there when you can actually not get caught up in all the weeds. But we do leave the weeds because they tell us a lot about stuff, and of course lots of weeds are edible, and weeds are really just things that you didn't intend to put there, but some of them are pretty awesome. So I'm not going to go into detail of here's how you map out your space and that kind of stuff. I will try to actually share some of that stuff at the website so that if you really are serious about starting and you don't know where to start, we'll have a link of resources and some kind of more concrete ideas of what to do that you can kind of follow up with. But I guess to end the presentation, I'd just like to say, so it's not really about growing the crops. And I don't know if you've read Masanobu's book, The One Straw Revolution, I think it is. He's a farmer and thinker and philosopher in Japan. And back in the, I think, 50s, late 50s, early 60s, he took his family's orchard that was quite highly pruned, very, very pristine, and he started letting things drop and stay on the ground. And he started observing nature, and he started letting the no-till system happen, not digging up things around the trees they had. And it's One Straw Revolution, and it's kind of talking about his journey and how he realized that he could be more productive by not tilling things and by not tearing things up. And he talks about how much more productive he became in that way. But the point of the book and the point of this talk and the point of Food Forest is to say that it's not about just that productivity and how much food you can produce, although it's kind of clear that you can produce a lot of it. It's really more about the new ways of seeing and of thinking and of acting in the world. And you really can't help but start acting in a different way when you're seeing these spaces, because of the beauty that's there and because of the life and the diversity that's there. And this is a blue oyster being grown on a hardwood log. They're delicious, they're gorgeous. Once you plant them into a log, they will produce for 4 to 6 years until that log is completely broken down into stuff that we can make more soil with. So I'll leave you with this quote because I think it's kind of the best way to go. There's thousands of more pictures of food forests, very beautiful pictures of food forest that we'll try to share with folks online and stuff. But thanks very much for coming today, and I hope you will all think about at least food forests and maybe start planting something. If you haven't already, I know some of you have. All right, thanks everyone. Yeah.